The letter lay half-burned on the dusty porch, still curling at the edges, smoke trailing into the heavy southern night. Beside it, a child's drawing fluttered, stick figures and a red house. Somewhere in the dark, a girl's voice whispered, "He didn't lie, he just ran out of time." Years later, people would still argue about who was truly to blame. Was it the sheriff, the pastor, or the girl herself? But for Claire, only one question ever mattered. Why did no one believe her when she said the fire wasn't an accident? The town of Willow Creek, tucked between Appalachian ridges and shadowed by pine-covered hills, looked like it hadn't changed in 50 years. A single main street, a white-steepled church, and a diner where the same 5 locals argued over pie every morning. But beneath its charm, the town held secrets buried deeper than the coal mines it was built upon. Claire Thompson had returned after 10 years. Once the pastor's daughter, now a school counselor in the city, she came back not to forgive, but to bury her father. Reverend Joseph Thompson had died suddenly, his heart giving out during morning prayers. The town called it God's timing. Claire called it too late. She parked outside the old wooden house she once called home, the place where screams were whispered and sins were hidden behind hymns. Ivy now crawled up the porch railings. The air was thick with silence, like the house itself was holding its breath. Nothing had changed. And that was the problem. Claire Thompson had the kind of face people remembered. Sharp jawline, storm gray eyes, and a calmness that unnerved even those who had nothing to hide. She had left Willow Creek at 18, dragging a suitcase and years of silence behind her. Now 30, hardened by city life and loss, she returned not for reconciliation but reckoning. People watched from behind curtains as she walked down Main Street. Sheriff Mark Danner, once her childhood friend, now a man worn down by duty and regrets, offered a nod that tried to bridge a decade of absence. Martha Green, the diner owner, clutched her rosary tighter when Claire passed by, whispering to no one in particular, "The pastor's girl is back. God help us all." Even the children seemed to know. Something heavy followed Claire like a second shadow. But the one who didn't flinch was Eli Carter, the gravekeeper, a man with a limp and a gaze that cut through pretenses. "You digging for closure, Claire," he said from behind his shovel, "or truth?" Claire didn't answer. Not yet. Because the town wasn't just waiting for her return, it had been preparing for it. If this story touches you, comment where you're watching from and give it a like to help others find it too. On the second night back, Claire unlocked the rusted mailbox outside her father's old home, the parsonage that hadn't heard laughter in over a decade. Inside, among bills and dust-covered church flyers, was a letter. No stamp, no return address, just her name. She opened it under the flickering kitchen light. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her father's, Pastor Jonathan Thompson, who had allegedly taken his own life 10 years ago. "They said I sinned beyond forgiveness, that I broke a sacred trust. But the truth, Claire, is deeper than their whispers. If you're reading this, someone let the lie live too long." Claire's breath caught. Her father had been accused of embezzlement and inappropriate conduct, a scandal that shattered the town's trust and drove her away in shame. She had never questioned the official story, until now. Below the message was a name she hadn't heard in years. Emily Wallace, the church secretary who had vanished days before her father's death. The letter ended with a line that ignited something primal inside her. "If they find out I wrote this, they'll bury me again." Claire didn't sleep that night, because some graves were never meant to stay closed. At dawn, Claire returned to the parsonage attic, a place sealed since her father's death. The old wood groaned beneath her boots as she pulled down forgotten boxes of sermon notes, newspaper clippings, and aging church records. Dust clouded the air, but something sharper than grief pierced her senses. A sealed envelope marked "Confidential, to be destroyed." Inside was a single sheet, a photocopy of a police report with redacted sections, and a photo of Emily Wallace, bruised, standing outside the sheriff's office, dated 2 days after her official disappearance. But Emily was never seen again, and the church board had declared her a runaway, a sinner, just like they said about Pastor Thompson. Claire's hands trembled. The timeline didn't make sense. Her father was condemned before any formal investigation. And this document? It shouldn't even exist. She called the sheriff's office, but the new sheriff, a soft-spoken man named Deputy Raymond King, claimed there was no such record in the system. "You sure you're not just chasing ghosts, Miss Thompson?" That night, Claire sat at her father's desk, staring at the faded police photo. She was no longer mourning a tragedy. She was uncovering a cover-up. Before watching, comment your location and hit subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be heard, and your support keeps them alive. Harmony Springs, with its white fence porches and Sunday potlucks, was a town built on illusion. Behind its neatly trimmed hedges were whispered secrets, affairs, blackmail, and quiet disappearances the church never acknowledged. Claire began to walk the streets not as a grieving daughter, but as an investigator. Her first visit was to Evelyn Hart, her father's former assistant. The elderly woman, now bedridden, lowered her voice as Claire showed her the document. They told him to keep quiet about Emily. He wouldn't, said truth had no price. Evelyn hesitated before slipping Claire a worn notebook. "Your father kept this hidden behind the pulpit. Inside were names, dates, donations, and cryptic notes. RK threatened withdrawal of funds. Emily claimed she was not the only one. The initials matched the name of Reverend Kenneth Ross, a charismatic, ambitious man who had succeeded her father, and who now led the church's expansion into neighboring towns. Claire began to suspect the accusations weren't just silencing her father, they were protecting something much deeper. The deeper she looked, the more resistance she met. Shopkeepers turned cold. Doors didn't open. Her father's old friends wouldn't return calls. Even the town's oldest judge, Judge Whitmore, avoided her eyes when they crossed paths. Something about Harmony Springs reeked of selective memory. A place where justice was polished like stained glass, beautiful but impossible to touch. And Claire was starting to feel like she was walking on glass. Claire found Reverend Kenneth Ross standing before the congregation, delivering a fiery sermon about redemption and sacrifice. His voice was magnetic, commanding every pair of eyes in the pews. But Claire didn't see a shepherd. She saw a man playing a role with perfection. After the service, she waited near the vestry door. When Ross saw her, a flicker of something unreadable passed across his face. "Claire," he said, voice smooth like velvet, "I hoped we could speak eventually." She cut him short. "We're speaking now. I want to know about my father's notebook." His smile froze. "You mean the ramblings of a man who became unwell?" She stepped closer, not blinking. "You mean the notes he took before he was accused and cast out? Before Emily disappeared?" That name stilled the air between them. Ross's hands clasped tighter. "You don't understand what you're poking at. This town is fragile. People here need stability. Your father made waves that could have sunk us all." Claire's voice trembled but held. "You mean he told the truth?" His face hardened, all warmth gone. "You're not him, and you don't know what he did to deserve what happened." Before she could respond, Ross stepped back into the shadows of the vestry and closed the door. The latch clicked shut with finality. Claire's heart raced, not from fear but from confirmation. This wasn't grief anymore. It was war. Her father hadn't fallen from grace, he'd been pushed, and someone powerful had everything to lose. The town of Elmridge had long buried the name Emily Bishop under layers of whispered rumors and polite silence. But for Claire, Emily's name was a key, and the lock it opened was darker than she feared. She visited the local library where her father once volunteered, combing through old newspaper clippings. Hidden in a dusty folder was a single article: "Teen girl missing after late choir practice, no leads." The date, 1 month before her father's public disgrace. Emily had been 17, bright, compassionate, and deeply involved with the church. The article noted Reverend Ross led the search efforts. But Claire noticed something odd. Emily's disappearance had never been treated as a crime. No investigation, no suspect, just vanished. Later that evening, Claire met Nolan under the same willow tree where they used to play as kids. She handed him the article. She didn't run away. She never would have left her sister behind. Nolan frowned, scanning the paper. "You think Ross is involved?" Claire nodded. "And I think my dad found out. That's why he was silenced." Nolan looked troubled. "Ross has allies everywhere, city council, sheriff's department. This isn't just church politics anymore." Claire's voice shook. "Then we expose it all. Not just what happened to my dad, but to Emily. Her story matters." That night, someone threw a brick through Claire's rental window. No note, no warning. Just shattered glass and a message written in silence. Stop digging. But Claire didn't stop. She visited Emily's childhood home, now abandoned. There, etched faintly into the wood of an old closet, she found scratched letters. Help R. Ross. She was sure of it. Whatever had happened to Emily, she hadn't left. She'd been taken. And maybe she'd tried to warn the world with her final strength. Nolan stood alone in the sheriff's office parking lot, his badge heavy in his pocket and his conscience heavier still. Claire had just told him everything. About Emily, about the closet carving, about her belief that Reverend Ross had something to do with it all. And now she wanted his help to dig deeper. But Nolan knew things she didn't. He had heard whispers years ago when he was still a deputy, before Ross officiated his own wedding. People who tried to question the Reverend had mysteriously lost jobs, families forced to move, files gone missing. It wasn't coincidence. It was power. The kind that operated with a handshake and a smile, while erasing lives behind closed doors. As he stepped inside the sheriff's office, Sheriff Dudley, a longtime church elder, looked up, heard Claire Bishop's back. Hope she doesn't stir up old dirt. Nolan gave a tight smile, suppressing the urge to say more. Just nostalgia, I think. But when he returned home, guilt gnawed at him. Claire was risking everything to clear her father's name, to seek truth for a girl the town had forgotten. And what was he doing? Hiding behind silence? Haunted by fear? That night, Claire messaged him. Claire, I found Emily's old diary. There are pages missing, torn out. Nolan, do you think they still exist? I think someone's trying to make sure they don't. He stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Nolan, I'll help, but we have to be careful. As the messages hung in the quiet room, Nolan looked at a photo of his wife and daughter. He knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about Emily or even Claire's father. If they were right, it was about a truth that could shatter everything. This character truly deserves a like, but sadly, they haven't received one yet. The next morning, Claire and Nolan parked a block away from the First Light Baptist Church. Sunday service had ended, but the building still echoed with hymns and hollow promises. They weren't here to pray. I don't know what we'll find, Claire whispered, clutching a small voice recorder in one hand, Emily's torn diary cover in the other. But we need to face him. Inside the sanctuary, Reverend Ross was alone, straightening hymn books, humming. He didn't flinch when he saw them enter. Claire Bishop, he said with a smile too smooth to be holy. And Officer Nolan, I suppose you've come for redemption or rebellion? Claire stepped forward. I came for the truth. Ross's eyes darkened. Truth? That's a dangerous thing to dig up in this town. Claire held up the diary cover. Emily wrote things about you, and someone made sure those pages disappeared. Someone like you. The Reverend's mask didn't crack, but his pause was damning. You think your father was innocent? He asked. You think this town didn't need a scapegoat? Nolan stepped between them. We're reopening the investigation. You'll need to come with us for questioning. Ross laughed, low and bitter. I buried half the secrets in this town. Do you think I'm afraid of you too? He moved closer, whispering so only Claire could hear. Your father begged me for forgiveness before he died. You won't find peace by digging through his ashes. Claire's hand trembled, but she didn't move. He died protecting something. Maybe that something was Emily. As they turned to leave, Ross called after them, voice rising with fury. If you chase ghosts, don't be surprised when they haunt you. But Claire wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. She was hunting the man who created them. News of Reverend Ross being questioned spread like wildfire through the quiet streets of Hollow Creek. By sunset, the town was no longer silent. It buzzed with rumors, old guilt, and buried anger. For the first time in years, people dared to speak Emily's name aloud. At the diner, Mrs. Lang, who had always left flowers at Emily's grave, whispered to another regular, I always knew something was off. She was terrified of someone. But who would believe a girl like her back then? The mayor called Claire that evening, his voice trembling. You need to stop. This is going to tear Hollow Creek apart. That's the point, Claire replied. It's already torn. We're just finally looking at the pieces. Meanwhile, Claire sat with Nolan on the hood of his car, watching the lights flicker inside the church from across the street. He's panicking, Nolan said. He knows it's slipping. Claire nodded. I want people to remember Emily not as a scandal, but as a girl who was failed by everyone, including me. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by a group of townspeople gathering near the church, some shouting, others praying, some just watching in silence. A few even held signs, "Justice for Emily, justice for the Bishop family." The Reverend stepped out onto the church steps, face shadowed, flanked by elders who had once protected him. But now their eyes were distant, uncertain. An elderly man approached Claire with tears in his eyes. "I was on the jury. I didn't believe your dad. I didn't think, I'm sorry." Claire didn't respond. She just stared ahead. The town had been silent for too long. Now it was screaming. And in that noise, maybe, just maybe, truth could finally breathe. If stories like this move you, we kindly ask you to subscribe. Every click helps us bring more unheard voices to light. Thank you for your presence and support. It means everything. The next morning, the church doors remained locked for the first time in over 2 decades. A typed statement was taped to the front. "All services are suspended until further notice. Rev. Thomas Ross." The town's newspaper ran a rare front-page headline, "The Trial We Ignored." Claire's phone buzzed nonstop, messages of anger, support, threats, and regret. She deleted none of them. In the quiet aftermath, Claire sat at her father's grave. For the first time, she didn't cry. "I think we're finally being heard, Dad," she whispered, "even if it's too late." Unexpectedly, she was joined by Ethan Caldwell, the local high school principal, once a youth group leader under Reverend Ross. "I didn't know everything back then," he said, voice low, "but I suspected. I didn't act. I was a coward." Claire looked at him, skeptical. "I'm resigning," Ethan added, "and I want to testify about what I saw, what I ignored. I don't want to be part of the silence anymore." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something. Later that day, Claire and Nolan walked through Hollow Creek's small park, where children played under watchful eyes. For the first time, someone approached Claire not with shame or blame, but with a quiet "thank you." It caught her off guard. She wasn't a hero. She was just someone who refused to let the truth rot underground any longer. And the ground was finally shifting. Despite the growing voices of support, Hollow Creek was splitting at the seams. Families that once gathered under the same church roof now crossed the street to avoid each other. In diners and hardware stores, whispers replaced greetings. At the town council meeting, the room was packed, standing room only. Claire sat in the back as the mayor, gray-faced and shaken, tried to hold order. "Let's not tear down a man's legacy because of one woman's accusations," barked Councilman James Weller, slamming his fist on the table. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Claire stood. "I am not one woman. I am the voice of every girl too scared to speak, every parent who trusted the wrong man. And I brought more than accusations. I brought evidence." The room fell to a hush. Behind her, Ethan Caldwell stood too. Then another woman, elderly, frail, slowly rose and said, "He told me I was special. I was 15. Silence. Then gasps. Then chaos. By nightfall, social media exploded. Hashtags with Reverend Ross's name trended across the state. Old sermons were dissected. Former church members from other towns posted cryptic comments. I always wondered if I was the only one. Claire sat on her porch that evening, staring at the sky. "Do you think this is justice?" Nolan asked quietly. She didn't answer right away. "No," she said at last, "but it's a crack, and cracks can let the light in." The news broke on a chilly morning. A retired police officer named Walter Griggs, once dismissed under vague charges, came forward with a sealed envelope he had kept hidden for over 2 decades. Inside were handwritten notes, a copy of a formal complaint, and a cassette tape, recorded evidence of Reverend Ross coercing a young girl into silence. It was undeniable. The envelope had been submitted to the sheriff's office in 1999, marked with red ink. Confidential. Urgent. It had never been logged, never investigated. Sheriff Langford, once revered, was now under state scrutiny. He offered no comment, simply resigned, and disappeared from public view. Claire listened to the tape in her living room, hands trembling. The girl's voice, barely above a whisper, cracked as she described what Ross did. His voice followed, sickeningly calm, manipulative, smooth like a serpent, promising paradise. This changes everything," Nolan muttered, pacing the room. "They buried it. They all knew." "It was never just about one man," Claire replied. "It was about a system that protected him." The town was stunned. Lawsuits were filed. a state investigation into the church network began. Former victims who had long moved away returned to testify. The people who had once doubted Claire now left apology notes on her porch. One simply read, "We see you now." She stood at the old church steps, now taped off by investigators. It was no longer a sanctuary, it was a crime scene. And for the first time, it felt like the beginning of healing. Months passed. The church was dismantled brick by brick, not by vandals, but by volunteers, some of whom had once sat silently in its pews. Claire didn't stop them. She stood nearby, holding her daughter's hand, watching the stained glass windows come down, panel by panel, each one a silent witness to decades of deceit. In its place, something new was built, not a church, but a community center. Funded by donations from survivors and allies, it offered therapy, legal aid, and a safe space for those who had nowhere else to turn. They named it The Haven. Claire refused any official title. She was simply a volunteer, folding chairs, making coffee, and listening. Nolan stayed too. The man who once feared standing against power now held weekly workshops on trauma recovery. "You can't erase the past," he'd say, "but you can write a better future on top of it." Mason, the boy who once screamed in his sleep, began to smile more. He planted a garden behind the Haven with Claire's daughter. Tomatoes, sunflowers, hope. One evening, Claire returned home to find a package at her door. Inside, an old photo of her family untouched. No note, just a small sticker on the back. Property of Langford Evidence Room. She stared at it for a long time, unsure whether it was guilt, closure, or cowardice that had brought it back. Still, she framed it, because some memories, however painful, deserve to be seen, not buried. The grand opening of the Haven felt unlike any dedication Claire had ever attended. No prayers, no hymns, just stories, raw, trembling, and real. Survivors stood before friends, family, and strangers to reclaim their voices. Every sentence was a wound stitched with courage. Claire took the microphone last. She didn't speak about her pain. People already knew. Instead, she spoke of what came next. "We cannot change what was done to us," she said, voice steady, "but we can change what is done with us." The crowd was silent, then applause, and tears, and silence again. After the event, Claire sat alone in the garden Mason had planted. A child approached her, 10 years old, quiet, eyes deep with questions. "Is it true you weren't afraid anymore?" he asked. Claire smiled, kneeling to meet his eyes. "No," she replied. "I was afraid every day, but I stopped letting fear decide who I became." The boy nodded slowly, then reached into his pocket and handed her a single sunflower seed. "For your own corner," he whispered. Claire held it gently in her palm. Sometimes redemption doesn't roar. It grows, quietly, persistently, in the cracks where light gets in. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft amber hue over the Haven, Claire stood silently at the garden's edge. The seed the boy had given her now rested beneath fresh soil, her own corner, just as he'd offered. She marked the spot with a smooth river stone carved simply, "Begin again." Inside, laughter and gentle music echoed through the halls. Sounds that once would have startled her now felt like signs of life returning. Across the courtyard, Mason watched her with quiet pride. They didn't need words. Not anymore. Claire turned, catching sight of the framed photograph that hung in the foyer. A group of women, arms around each other, each face marked not by what had happened, but by what they had overcome. She whispered, not to anyone in particular, "We were never broken, just buried, and now we rise." The camera pans upward. Branches sway, wind brushes past hanging chimes, and the screen fades to black. Then a final message appears. "For those still waiting to be heard, you are not alone. Speak, fight, begin again." If this story touched your heart, please support our team by subscribing to this channel. Share this video with friends and loved ones who value human stories. Don't forget to hit the like button and leave a comment below. How did this story make you feel? Would you like to see part 2? Let us know. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter.